What's up, folks? The finger to the iris of Amazon bestsellers, Jack Slack. And this is Fights Gone By, episode 46, I believe. Bit of a slow week in terms of what happened over the weekend. We had an event in Glasgow, which was good. Not even a lot of news this week, to be honest. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some news, some recaps, some questions, book of the week, and it's a crazy one, so you might enjoy that. And then some previews of the fights this weekend, which are, again, sort of a mixed bag. But let's get right into it. Top news story this week. Demetrius Johnson comes out and says the Dana White thing was just a misunderstanding. They're both grown-ass men, literally used the term grown-ass man, with kids. So they sat down and they talked about it like grown-ass men. And now they've come to agreement and they're going to talk about the TJ Dillashaw fight or whatever. Which kind of undermines this entire thing, because this was the most interested that anyone has ever been in watching Demetrius Johnson fight. You had the Vince McMahon Stone Cold Steve Austin angle going. If I were running the flyweight division, which I should be, I offered to 2 years ago, whatever it was, I would continue my rivalry with Demetrius Johnson. And anytime he won, I'd come out with a microphone. That was good, DJ, but next you're going to have to fight twice in one night. Or something like that. Give him weird stipulations. Because nobody else is interested in this division in the slightest. The only way you were ever going to get people to buy a Demetrius Johnson fight was to make it so that it seemed like Demetrius Johnson versus Dana White. In fact, this week I tweeted, I'm going to buy the Johnson versus Borg fight 5 times. That'll show Dana White. And I got a lot of people replying like that was actually serious and the right thing to do. Dana White pretty good generally at being the bad guy when he needs to be. I mean, that's why he's there. He's out front being the face of the UFC while firstly the Fertittas and now WME do whatever they want backstage. He's more a character actor than he is like the head honcho. He should have just kept going. Kept the beef up. Oh, and then DJ and Matt Hume decided to hire Malkikawa. If you don't know Malkikawa, you'll know him for getting John Jones and Yoel Romero off their USADA violations by finding tainted supplements that matched with the things that they had been caught with. But managers are like agents in Hollywood or lawyers. You're never really going to find one that's good. You just want to try and get one who is good at their job. Oh, you might also know Malkikawa from Matt Mitrione firing him in a post-fight interview, which was pretty funny. What else is going on? Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler are apparently going to be booked into an angle with the WWE. Skimmed over this. It was nice to see Shayna Baszler getting props for being a Josh Barnett and Billy Robinson student. I mean, she was a really big deal back in the day in women's MMA. It just didn't pan out over the long haul, and really the end of her career was quite sad. But yeah, if she wants to be a pro wrestler, you know, she's got the lineage. I don't know. Yeah, lineage. I mean, that's mainly for fruity Wing Chun debates, but she's got the pedigree and the training to do it, so why not? And Ronda Rousey, you know, whatever makes her money. As long as she's not being advertised as the able to beat 50% of men on the roster or whatever, I'm happy. And what's going on in the shit show of Mayweather versus McGregor? We're not going to talk about this too much this week. I know I said that last week and I got into a tangent, whatever, a rant about the event. I'm going to hold off, give you my real thoughts in a full podcast that's called like Mayweather versus McGregor, everything you need to know or whatever, nearer the time. But the terrible press conferences concluded. Just, badly scripted nonsense from both sides, but it managed to change the betting line. Now McGregor is less of an underdog. Oh god, I was in the gym the other day and literally dudes parroting the same remarks in the locker room about how it's stuff that Mayweather hasn't seen before, and I just wanted to be like, what's he not seen? Bad boxing, Well, not bad boxing, but bad boxing from a professional boxing standpoint. What else happened? Oh, Ray Ellaby, or whatever his name is, Leonard M. Ellaby, who is the CEO of Mayweather Productions or whatever they are. He came out to say that Conor McGregor, that footage of him on the heavy bag, on the whatever it was, a wrecking ball bag, teardrop bag, basically that footage of him looking very slow that people put up next to Mayweather was Conor playing a trick. which is pretty bad when your main opponent has to your opponent's representative has to come out and try and make it look like it's more of a convincing matchup than it is. I'm never going to count Conor McGregor out, but that is just hilarious that Mayweather's own people are trying to hype up McGregor's chances, and he's undoing it by showing boxing footage of himself. He just needs to use those MMA angles and that MMA range, and then he'll be set. Oh. And finally, HBO Real Sports has interviewed Ramzan Kadyrov, who is the fairly awful person in charge of Chechnya. You'll sometimes see him referred to as Strongman. Don't know what his actual title is, but he's been the dictator there since I think it was his father was assassinated in 2007. Basically, he's propped up by Putin and hates the gays, loves fighting. That's all you need to know about him. And being careful how I say this because I don't want to get sued by Chechnya, but Fedor, well, basically he had his kids fight in a cage fight, and Fedor was asked about it, said he didn't like it, and then Fedor's daughter, who's like 13, got assaulted on the way home. Not a pleasant guy, and if you are an MMA fighter who would happily live in Chechnya, you can retire and go and thug for him for good money. In fact, you'll see a lot of, what's his name, Ali Abdelaziz, whoever, a lot of his fighters end up going to Chechnya. Weidman, Frank Mir, Verdum, all got their photos taken with this guy and his bodyguards. Should be an interesting interview. Looking forward to watching the whole thing. I would rate this guy as one of the worst things for MMA's image going on right now. We'll touch on the others later. So we had this Glasgow card, the one I said was almost good enough to go to Glasgow for. Bit of a weird one. Had some weird finishes. Not a tremendous amount that I really want to talk about from it. Danny Henry versus Daniel Tamor was brilliant. I got very confused because I thought it was David Tamor, and I was like, he looks a bit small. And then I was like, he's also not southpaw, and he's not really kicking at all. Basically lit up Henry for the first round, started loading up on these big uppercuts and started eating counters as a result. Henry came back, poured it on, got the decision, 29-28 across the board. Accepted 29-26 I'm reading here, but I don't remember that. That seems weird. Neil Seery sadly lost his retirement match, which if you are a UK fighter, don't have your retirement fight in the UK. Doesn't work out well. Poor old Brad Pickett last time. Neil Seery this time. Actually, when's Dan Hardy coming back? He's been teasing that for ages. But Neil Seery is a tough lad. He came into the UFC, I believe it was on short notice, to fight Brad Pickett. I was there for that one. And he made Brad Pickett look very bad for the first round and a bit. Just boxed him up on the feet. Even though Brad Pickett was paid full-time fighter all the time, and then the next day Neil Seery was back to sweeping wherever he worked. There was pictures of him online sweeping the floor in a high-vis jacket with black eyes. So always came across as a likable guy, and he had a really good fight with Koji Horiguchi, actually. Horiguchi bounced his head off the cage with these long right straights, and Neil Seery just kept coming back and taking it. And he actually got some good punches in on Koji Horiguchi, basically by working in the grey areas. I think he has some kind of experience in judo or something like that. But he went for a nice uchimata inside in a thigh throw, and immediately came out with the left hook. It was almost Fedor-esque, but not quite as graceful. And a couple of other things like that. And it was just just that way that savvy old vets can keep up with these young guys in some of the exchanges. Paul Craig got starched. His exciting start in the UFC has turned into a streak of losses. How many is that now? Oh no, just 2, but they were both hard TKOs. In fact, this one was an outright KO. I don't think he threw a single punch the entire fight, which is a very strange thing to do. He was throwing these skip-up low kicks, and every time the straight would come back down the center, or a hook would come as he was recovering his leg. And if you're concerned about trading punches with a guy, it doesn't mean don't throw any punches at all, which was very strange. I'd have to check the fight metric, but I don't know if they even record which ones are punches or kicks, but almost everything he threw was a kick. I think he threw like a spinning elbow at some point too. But Roundtree starched him and then stood over him in kind of a dickish way. The thing to always remember is that next time it could be you. But Khalil Roundtree's an interesting guy. He's been around for a while. There, Anderson Silva was talking about him being like the up-and-coming guy who might win the title back in the day. Went 0-2 in the UFC after a 4-0 record outside it. Had that famous fight where I think it was him who told his mum to shut up while he was trying to wrestle from underneath a guy. And then he's just come back with 2 knockouts, one in February and one just now. So he's doing all right for himself. Maybe recapture some of the hype. The other thing is that Craig's big win was over Enrique de Silva. Armbarred him in a couple of minutes into the second round. But Enrique de Silva since then has lost both his fights too. He had that awful one against Ion Cutelaba, which was the one that started with that getting in each other's face before the bell, which is just... That stuff really annoys me too. Maybe I'm a fuddy-duddy, but I also don't think you should allow the guy to walk across the cage and get in the other guy's face, because all the other guy has to do, and he's hyped up, so he might do this, is just like push him or smack him, and then suddenly you got no fight. Nobody gets paid. Everyone goes home. Very strange. Paul Felder versus Stevie Ray was an important one, because apparently Paul Felder came in as the underdog, but that seemed weird. Paul Felder... Well, they look like they were in different weight classes, because Paul Felder is a massive lightweight, and Stevie Ray is not a particularly big lightweight. Lovely knee in the clinch, sends Ray to the ground, and to be honest, I thought that should have been stopped there. It was like he got knocked out twice, and then he got stopped with elbows, and the referee actually called it off. He had that fight against Joe Lozon. The difference in that fight on the ground was that Ray could keep up with him. He could retain his guard or get back to guard or whatever. It was just that Lozon was hitting him while he did it. It's that difference between... It's the difference between MMA and jiu-jitsu, really. The bottom position should suck for the guy on the bottom, even if he's keeping up with all the steps grappling-wise. Not much bearing on this fight, to be honest, because he was already pretty badly hurt by the knee before that. But Stevie Ray came in with a lot of hype. A lot of people have sort of gone off the hype, but I think he's a guy with a ton of potential. But seeing the size difference there, it really makes you think, could he try featherweight? Because... get on the fight mill, because Paul Felder was, but Paul Felder looked absolutely enormous. Love Paul Felder. He's one of the funnest guys on the roster. Heavy kicks. And his dad had died 3 weeks before this, or something like that, so he had his ashes on a necklace, which was pretty moving. Then in the co-main, he had Cynthia Calvillo versus Joanne Calderwood. Calvillo, whatever. Cynthia took the decision fairly decisively. Yeah. But Joanne Calderwood came out afterwards and said, I don't think she did enough, blah, blah, blah. Turned a lot of fans off her again. If she didn't have the voice of an angel, I think a lot of the stuff she says would get her into trouble with fans. It was that she was using that front kick, but she wasn't really doing anything with it. And the thing that I've noticed a lot in Calderwood's recent fights, and this may be because she's fighting people who are going to try and take her down more than when she was in the the lower leagues. But when I first started watching Calderwood, they called her Dr. Neville. That's her Twitter handle, because she had really good stepping knees. I said at one point that I think she had the best stepping knees, except maybe Alistair Overeem, that you see utilised in MMA. But those have sort of largely disappeared, which is a bit of a shame. I do like the step up front kick, but again, it's one of those tricky ones where, Semi Schilt did it all the time, but people treated it like it was something that he could just spam and get away with because he was huge. If the other guy's not stepping into it, it's a big waste of effort, to be honest. You're swinging your whole limb straight at them and getting nothing out of it. If it just grazes off them or they're moving back when you hit them or something like that. Very tricky. You've got to trap them on the cage, or you've got to get them walking forward. And getting a guy walking forward to be right on the end of your reach for such a long motion is also very tricky. Maybe more inside low kicks, pairing those up would be good for her. She's always had this problem where she gets cranked off her jab. She'll throw her jab and get hit at the same time. Who was that lass? Armbarred her. She caught her with the left hook at the same time as Calderwood was jabbing. Yeah, if Calderwood could develop a really nice jab where she got right down behind, even like that turtle jab that Petrosian uses, lots of Thai boxers use it, where you get down behind the right elbow, you get into the crook of the right elbow as you throw the left hand. Except Petrosian, obviously, other hand, because he's a southpaw. but could be useful for her. It's just the problem that she's always going to have is that she has a game that her favorite techniques are sort of giving the leg, like the step up left knee, step up left straight kick. Those are all like, here's my leg. Even after you've hit the guy, if he just brings his hands up to catch the leg where it is in the stomach, you're almost giving up a single leg attempt. I don't know if she's left-footed. She's probably left-footed, I guess, but sometimes it's better just to do the long right low kicks and things like that. Straight kicking is a huge deal in MMA nowadays because, when you've got the top guys who can wrestle so well, you get all the advantages of straight kicking. You get the range and that you're going to beat every other, you're going to beat the round kicks on the inside line and so on. The problem is if you don't have that wrestling, it's a lot easier to give up your leg that way and get yourself caught. It's interesting that like all these rules about striking generally, you're seeing them apply more now at the top levels now that everyone can sort of do everything. But at the lower levels, they don't always apply quite the same ways. Anyway, she's still my girl, so hope she gets back on track. I was impressed by Cynthia Calvillo. Had my eye on her like people have been talking about her for a few fights now, and I've always been like, well, I'll keep my eye out. And there's always been something else going on the card that's sort of taken my attention off her in the aftermath. But she's been doing good work. What is she, 5-0 now? 6-0? Yeah, 6-0. Oh, and that was catchweight. Yeah, Calderwood. The other thing about her. Really, she needs that 125 division. I would really like to see the UFC bring that in. The problem is that they are worried about draining the other two divisions, especially with this 145 division coming in, where they're basically going to pay people to step up in weight and fight Cyborg. Is probably the way that's going to work, because otherwise, who the fuck's Cyborg going to fight? So she's in a bit of a rough spot there, being between the two weight classes and not really having too many techniques that she can rely on without giving the attempt at the takedown. And then you had Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Gunnar Nelson. This one is super contentious now because Gunnar Nelson did get poked in the eye about 4 times in the space of 30 seconds. The videos that went up afterwards, I retweeted one of them. Obviously, not everything I retweet I agree with every aspect of. The guy was talking about him swinging the overhand with the hand open. Didn't really look like that, and he did chin him with the overhand. That was the one that hurt Nelson. You don't try and hurt people with open-handed punches. But there were some very clear feeling for the eye, and then along the fence, there's a very obvious slap, basically pushing his finger into Nelson's eye. And the problem with intentional, unintentional is that we have to assign blame, and we have this, we should have this sort of innocent till proven guilty thing, but the thing about a foul is that it's a foul. It doesn't really matter if it's intentional or not, if the effects are the same. Now, obviously, this was a very controversial one because I was watching it and I didn't notice the pokes at the time. The referee obviously didn't notice the pokes at the time. But going back, obviously, it did make a difference. Apparently, Nelson is appealing this, but generally, appealing things doesn't work out too well. Most fighters don't even bother if they have a very controversial one. The main thing the fighters do it for is to bring attention to it in the eyes of the fans so that people can go, yeah, well, it was bullshit, blah, 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 so that next time they fight, that's remembered. But I very much doubt that he's getting this turned into a no contest. I would be, I'd approve of it being turned into a no contest. It doesn't take away from the fact that he was knocked out, but it does, point out that there, when Ponzinibbio fights again, we will go, oh, that's the guy who starched Gunnar Nelson, even if it's changed to a no contest. But, I feel like, firstly, monetarily, and secondly, just the record should take account of the fact that the guy was gouged fairly obviously in the eye. What do we see? I mean, Nelson's chin was high up in the air because it always is. That's the karate style. You can fight karate with your chin low, but it's the nice upright back which tends to help with that in and out carriage. And doing that often means that guys can't put their chin on their chest or behind their shoulder or whatever. Bisping and Karen Bryant had a falling out over this, but it wasn't really a serious thing. They always rib on each other. But his chin was up in the air, and that makes you very susceptible to the overhand. That's the main danger. That's what he got clocked with. But before that, he landed a gorgeous left hook. He's added this slappy left hook to his game since he started, moving over to MMA, because he was a karateka back in the day and then a jiu-jitsu standout. And then as he was moving to MMA, he added this slappy left hook, and it's become like a solid punch on its own right. It's very slick. Robert Whittaker does the same, combining that left hook with the sort of karate phasing in stuff, the point karate phasing in stuff. Because people get butthurt if you say karate just generally, because they go, Andy Hug, and you're like, no, Andy Hug was nothing to do with this sort of style of karate. That phasing in stuff works really well with the left hook. He also landed a lead right uppercut, which, not a huge fan of those because they do open you up to the left hook so much. They have their place, though. Like, everything has its place. If you can get away with it, reliably, if you can manufacture a way where you know you will get away with it most of the time, that's a fair enough technique. But let's not linger on that fight too long, Gunnar Nelson is a divisive figure anyway. Don't know why. He never says anything, at all, really. He just is quite a plain person and a bit of an Iceman, very cool. But a lot of people don't like him because of the SBG, Straight Blast Gym Ireland connection. A lot of people have beef with them, or just like a grudge towards them. And to be fair, there are cases where you can understand people having a grudge towards them. Case in point, Charlie Ward, forgot to mention him. Charlie Ward should not be in the UFC. He's not a very good fighter, objectively. And that showed, in this fight. It showed in the last fight when he was lumbering forward, throwing really clumsy arm punches. But it showed in this fight just how much more athletic the other guy was, which, there are plenty of not incredibly athletic fighters in the UFC, but they're also technically very skilled. And Ward did not seem to, or does not seem to be. But then he's got 3 fights. And to play devil's advocate, you can kind of feel for him because he's going to struggle getting regional fights on the regional scene after the João Cavallo accident. If you don't know, Charlie Ward was the guy, unfortunate enough, to be the winning party, or basically the surviving party, in that fight with João Cavallo. João Cavallo passed away shortly after the fight, and it became a huge deal in Ireland. I mean, there's a whole big section I wrote on it in Notorious. I won't go off the top of my head here because I don't want to get anyone's details wrong and offend anyone, but it was a huge thing. People were linking Conor McGregor's fake retirement to that. They were saying, oh my God, he was there for the death of João Cavallo. But the scary thing with these deaths is that generally they're not particularly, in any combat sport, if you see a death, it's not particularly egregious most of the time. You'll see ones that are very obvious, like Emil Griffith versus Benny Perret, where the guy is very obviously severely hurt, gets caught in the ropes, the referee doesn't get in time. You'll see ones like Gerald McClellan, where something was very wrong with him. He was spitting out his mouthpiece and dropping his hands and doing this really obvious, hard blink, like there was stuff in his eyes. And his corner and the referee did nothing about that. Duk-Kyu Kim, the guy who fought Ray Mancini, got horribly beaten in that fight. You'll see ones where you could blame the referee, or you can say that is that is an unusual finish to a fight, or unusual the way that fight went. The problem is that a lot of these fatalities in combat sports are completely unremarkable. If you watch the João Cavallo fight, the only thing that seems off is that he gets very tired, but Charlie Ward's tired too. But naturally, the next day it was all over the media. Joe Duffy, the not Joe Duffy, Irish Joe Duffy, the fighter. Joe Duffy, the moaning. I think I called him a moaning reminder of the good old days that never happened. In the book, this is. He did a radio show on, I think it's RTE, the big broadcaster there. And he basically had people calling and going, oh no, it's awful. If only they were wearing head protection, then at least the brain's protected. And you're going, no, that's not how fucking headgear works. We've proven that now. Just people ranting. And the funny, shouldn't laugh during this sad story, but the funniest thing about the whole thing is that he starts telling the story about how this guy's getting 9 extra digs to the head while he's already down. The fight finished in the turtle position, and it wasn't like the guy was unconscious. It's just a few punches to the head, and then he's not defending himself, so the ref stops it. They're both exhausted. But Joe Duffy starts telling the story, and he stops because he almost becomes fixated on the fact that there's women there holding pints. He's like, and there's women cheering and they're holding pints, and then he finally remembers what he's supposed to be talking about, the death of this poor guy. Just Joe Duffy, I listened to a few of his radio shows while writing that book, and he is such a prick. If you're listening, Joe Duffy, go fuck yourself. Anyway, so Charlie Ward is going to have trouble picking up fights on the regional scene, so he was thrown in at the deep end by a favour through Conor McGregor and John Kavanagh, presumably, coming into the UFC. Problem is that you can be a 3-0 fighter matched with a 5-0 fighter, and you could be 3-0 in awkward slogs against guys like João Cavallo, against a 5-0 guy in Galor Bafando, who basically was a superstar and didn't like fighting on the regional shows, so he... Apparently he just stopped appearing on regional shows because he couldn't be asked with it anymore, and they lured him out of retirement with this fight. The guy has like 2 losses by disqualification for kneeing the guy on the ground, but other than that, he's been a violent finisher, basically. So Charlie Ward goes for an awkward throw, and Bafando pushes him off, and he hits his head off the mat and knocks himself out. Which is a first for me. I mean, I've seen guys go for a drop Seoinage, the drop shoulder throw, and the other guy's head hits the mat and knocks him out. It's legit. You can knock yourself out on the mat, but I've never seen it happen in that sort of fashion, which was truly bizarre. So if Charlie Ward didn't turn up in the UFC again, that would be fair, to be honest. Let him earn his way back. I'm sure Bellator would give him a shot because he's a friend of... Well, they're aiming to impress everyone with James Gallagher, who did actually really good in his last fight. But they'd love another SBGI guy on their card for whenever they come to Europe. Or Boston. Any of those Irish strongholds in America. And to be fair to Charlie Ward, he made his debut in 2015, 0-1, got 2 wins under his belt, 1 decision and 1 that awful death João Cavallo. Got 1 more win outside the UFC, fair play, but he went to Swansea to do that, and then into the UFC in 2 hard losses. So he's not been at this game long. He just shouldn't be here. Anyway, not like tremendously important matches, as I said. Let's do some questions, but not before a quick plug. If you want to support the Fights Gone By podcast, which is independent, I don't have to shout out any sponsors or anything, even though people do keep giving me nice things. I like to keep this independent so that I don't have to do it for Vice or anyone else, and it means that I can just... Well, I've never had my opinion censored by anyone, but it means that you can be sure that I'm just giving you the straight dope. If you want to support us, head to Patreon, find Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, whatever, on Patreon. If you sign up for the Patreon bonus, whatever it is, you get the bonus history lecture each month. I'm going to be announcing the subject of that next week. Our most recent one is Kazushi Sakuraba and the Pride 2000 Grand Prix. Huge episode, near enough 2 hours, and apparently very good listening for the commute. Also, if you haven't bought Notorious, I did just talk about a load of stuff that's in it. If you want to hear all that stuff, but more eloquent, along with loads of diagrams of fighting and shit, go buy Notorious. Really good deals on it since this fight was announced. Unfortunately, not out in the US till September, which I feel is a short-sighted move by my publisher, but, I'm not going to complain. Pick it up in the UK, or from UK Amazon or whatever. Have it sent over for like a couple of extra quid. If this fight doesn't completely ruin the McGregor effect, we'll probably do like a 2nd edition soon enough, or a revised edition, whatever, like it's a textbook. So if you want to get either of those, cheers. Right, let's do some questions. Hello, the Jack Black of Fighting podcast crack. Fair enough. My question for this week's podcast is, back in the day we used to hear butterfly guard touted as the superior style for defending from ground and pound barrages. Despite this, we have largely seen butterfly guard not be incorporated into standard MMA meta, as we would have predicted. Why do you think this is? Which do you think the superior tool for this purpose? Which do you think is the superior tool for this purpose? Closed guard or butterfly? Also, is there a style or position within grappling that you feel would be effective in MMA that hasn't made the crossover to from sport grappling? Cheers from your boy forever, Stefan. Yeah, butterfly guard, the logic was fairly sound. It's better to have a sweeping guard. Your knees are between you and the opponent, which means that if they do break away and posture up, you're basically in position to scoot back and perform a technical stand-up or something. You'll see a lot of guys have good success with butterfly guard. There's a few guys in MMA who are good players of butterfly guard. Gegard Mousasi did a good job against Chris Weidman, but did get passed straight into mount at one point. Joe Lozon is a really good example of a guy who uses butterfly guard well. He'll get an overhook from guard or go to like scissor sweep from guard and then put in one butterfly hook and move out. Also saw Whitaker do it from double grapevines when you put your feet in under the opponent's ankles from closed guard and stretch them out, which is really just an annoying move, but it does give you that space inside the hip to swim one foot in. You'll see a lot of guys get butterfly guard that way, actually. In fact, Lozon versus, was it Marcin Held? Or Marcin Held, rather? That's a good fight, I believe, if I remember correctly, for a couple of different entrances to butterfly guard from different sort of positions on his back. Obviously, you can get to butterfly guard from half guard. If you watch any EBI or anything like that, the Danaher Death Squad, Eddie Cummins, Gary Tonin, Gordon Ryan, maybe not so much Nicky Ryan. I haven't watched as much of him, but they all like butterfly half guard because they love reaping the leg. For the heel hooks. Easier to do that if you can shoot your feet through. So having the butterfly hook means that you're within kicking through distance, or it can be the knee that remains inside when you go for the leg. But also having your foot inside the opponent's leg means that it's harder for them to go for leg reaps or toe holds or anything like that. If you watch Dean Lister versus Josh Barnett, he tries to use butterfly guard in the same way. If you have your feet inside the opponents, it's very hard for them to reap a leg quickly. I think one of the main disclaimer, I'm not a great butterfly guard player, but no-gi, I like playing it a lot. Learning to play with the overhook is very hard for a start, but also like one of the necessities of being able to use the butterfly guard as much as you would want to. Guys, if you have the underhook and you sit up into the guy, he knows what you're going to do. Most people, when they go into someone else's butterfly guard, they'll have an underhook at least, and they'll just work to smush with that and kill any attempt to sit up or sweep the other way. Most guys, if they force the butterfly guard, which is a very common style of passing in no-gi grappling and therefore MMA, if they try and force the butterfly guard, they'll have both underhooks. So, it's useful to be able to get a hold of the overhook, make space and sit up, and then go for things. But also having the overhook makes it a lot easier to perform a technical stand-up. If you watch Gary Tonin, as I said, does tons of stuff off that whizzer. He gets it from both butterfly guard standing up into it, and also as opponents pass his guard, he'll take the overhook and sit up and do like a sit-up escape Marcelo style or Ryan Hall style, depending on what you've seen. Really good example of butterfly guard being used to get up would be BJ Penn versus Frankie Edgar. I think the second one, he gets an overhook in closed guard and then he puts his feet on the hips, moves Frankie Edgar back, puts his hooks in. To be honest, when you're asking about better guards for MMA, I think you gotta, Legato said a great thing about being able to play all guards. Like, the guard is just everything you're doing from the bottom, basically. You play what you get. If you can grab a foot or you can grab back like quarter guard or some shit, you need to be able to do something with it. Having a preferred guard is like something that generally is more useful if you're going to pull guard in a competition of some kind. In MMA, you've got to play the position you're dealt. I think generally in MMA, more useful than butterfly guard just for butterfly guard's sake is anything using a knee shield. If you watch like Crone Gracie, Henry Akins, that whole thing, but Crone Gracie uses the knee shield beautifully, like in both gi and no gi. So like almost as if you're going for a scissor sweep, but the knee's pointing upwards more. He uses that brilliantly to set up like arm drag, collar drags and collar chokes in the gi, but arm drags and all sorts of other stuff. Generally, like getting the feet on the hips, forcing the opponent to stand up, anything like that, much better for MMA than focusing on just trying to get a sweep, because it's very rare to sweep guys in MMA. And of course, as soon as you have your back near the fence, all overhead sweeps are out of the question. Any type of stand-up is going to be slowed down by that because you're not going to be able to run backwards or throw your legs out behind you to sprawl. Positioning makes a huge difference in this game. To be honest, if you watch guys like Kelvin Gastelum, we're going to talk about him later, or Yoel Romero, they've done great not even using guard. They just turn belly down, get up to their hands and knees, and stand up. And if the other guy's not confident to jump on your back, because a lot of the time they'll take the body lock when they do that, and if they're not confident to jump on your back without being shucked off, you'll be slippy at this point too. If they're not confident doing that, then you're probably safe. Nick Diaz against George St. Pierre would literally pass his own leg over George St. Pierre's head from guard, roll to his knees, and stand up on his hands and feet. But that's just riffing on ideas. There are great examples of butterfly barred players in MMA, like Joe Lozon, like I said. Shinya Aoki used to do a bit of it, but mainly just guys who understand feet on the hips, feet inside hooks, or closed guard, all really just work together. The best guard players you see will do all of that, in an MMA context at least. I'll tell you one guard that really fucking sucks for the guy on top. Anderson Silva used to just figure four his legs because he had these long-ass legs, such a skinny dude. He'd just put a figure four in and not let the opponent do anything, just keep them broken down. And he actually did sweep a guy like that too, but basically the leg that's hooking over the body triangle goes inside for like a butterfly hook. Great way to toe hold yourself on both feet, but he did it in like the little leagues. But yeah, the body triangle, legit, if you can do it. It's just that, depends. Do you want to be a dynamic guard player or someone who's holding out for a stand-up? And both are legit. And in fact, if you watch someone like even Andre Galvao at the top levels, if he goes for a butterfly sweep, half the time all that'll happen is that he'll stand up and maybe go for the front headlock. Sweeping good guys without a gi, really, really hard. Especially when you start adding in the fence and all that shit. Anyway, sorry, rambled on about that for ages, Stefan. Dear Dr. Jackal and Mr. Slack, I can think of very few fighters, brackets apart from Edmund's proteges, this is going to be a good question, who could benefit more from a camp change than Phil Davis. I felt this way for years, and seeing him against Bader again only cemented this opinion. Not only does his comfort with striking look no better than it did at the beginning of his career, nearly 10 years ago, but he seems to have no understanding of striking on the strategic/tactical level. He's got great reach, good power in his hands, and nice kicks, but no ability to exploit any of his advantages, even to set up his wrestling. In the Bader fight, he landed 2 nice leg kicks and then completely abandoned them for the rest of the evening. It's like a video game character with attributes all set to 90, and then their 5-year-old brother takes the controller. It's sad to see a fighter with such physical gifts and great wrestling/submission base squander those advantages through a profound lack of understanding. In any case, I'm curious to get your thoughts on fighters who you can think of in a similar situation. Anyone else comes to mind in terms of fighters who had all the physical tools, maybe even the technique, but whose downfall was the strategic tactical game? In addition, any examples you can think where a fighter turned it around, either with a change of mindset or coach/camp? Thanks, Jeff. Don't want to go too much into like which fighters I think should change camps, because that's a very personal thing. Like I say every time this comes up, it's not a reflection on the coach or the training partners. It's more a reflection on chemistry, or even just a change of mindset. You can have Faraz Zahabi could explain something to me 15 times, and I might not get it. And then someone comes in for a seminar or something, and suddenly they'll say the same thing and it will just click. And that's just how teaching generally works. Someone will have a way of explaining something that suddenly makes sense. And I use Faraz Zahabi there specifically because he's such a good coach. That's half the fun of this whole fight thing. It's not just the athletic talent of an individual. It's not just the coach. It is also the chemistry between the two. Mike Tyson without Cus maybe would have been a really good boxer, but Cus had been working on this style for years, which happened to work really well with Tyson's build at heavyweight. And he met him at the right time to, change his life, and also young enough that he could basically bring him up in this style of fighting, which guys like Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres learned later, and weren't, if you look at Tyson's movement versus Floyd Patterson or Jose Torres, it's very clear that this guy has basically learned this from an extremely young age. Anyway, so yeah, don't know about that, but yes, Phil Davis could use any sort of change in his life to make himself better. Is he still training with Alexander Gustafsson, or is that whole thing not going anymore? Presumably, people are showing him on the pads every day, some kind of combination or setup or something like that. But all Phil Davis ever does is throw a low kick, and then a low kick, and then a high kick, or something like that. So he can catch the odd person out with that sort of stuff, but against Rumble Johnson was really obvious that he didn't have any other ideas. There's so many kicks open to you. There's so many ways you can fight even without using your hands. And then if he used his hands confidently, he'd be even better. It always feels with Phil Davis that he's in with someone who's worse than him all around, and that's when he can left hook come on in the head, or he's in with guys who don't have the wrestling of him, and then he'll just ragdoll them. You never really see his striking on display against good opponents. That fight with Bader was pretty painful to watch. There's tons of things you could do with Phil Davis, even if it was just the classic Dutch-style combinations of punches into kicks. Just do the Gokhan Selke thing. Gokhan Selke doesn't even try to land half his punches. If you're just throwing them out there and flailing your hands, even that works to set up the kicks better than just throwing the kicks straight off the mat. Maybe get him down to Henry Hooft. That might be fun. If Rumble's still training, it would be interesting to have him in sparring with Rumble every few days. Just because that was a fight where he was obviously worried about the opponent once he realized how powerful this guy was and that he couldn't take him down. Being in with that every day would be pretty good for him, even if it's just a confidence thing, even if Rumble wasn't even going his hardest in sparring. Just being in there every day with the guy who gave him so much trouble would have a massive impact on him, I'm sure, and on his willingness to throw hands, in his willingness to step in. But tons of good camps he could go to. I don't know who he's with at the moment. Is he still with Alliance? But there's so many good camps with a boxing coach who'll work your takedowns in with the game. Longo Serra, great guys. What they've done with Weidman. Aljamain Sterling's still not great hands, but Aljamain Sterling has success in spite of the fact that he doesn't have great hands. In fact, that's the sort of thing that maybe Phil Davis should be looking to. Yeah, I don't know how to fix Phil Davis, but I would suspect more of it is mental than him not being taught things or him, not even showing things in the gym. I'm sure in the gym, he's a killer. When he's comfortable, he's a killer. It's just this complete awkwardness when he gets in the ring is really strange. Maybe a sports psychologist is in order. And I'm not saying that facetiously or anything. They can actually really help fighters. Dear Jack, thanks for all the wonderful articles and podcasts and all that. How would you compare Joe Calzaghe and Michael Bisping? Both are high-volume, low-impact punchers with seemingly endless stamina who are often publicly reviled, or maybe just here in the US, despite their winning ways. Is there more to be said? Tactics that unite the two. I don't know if you take suggestions for articles, but the headline that comes to mind is Refuse to Lose, Michael Bisping, Joe Calzaghe, and the Stiff Upper Lip. Thanks again from Marvellous Marlin Handler. Okay. Yeah, there are similarities between the two. The pace is the main thing. We talked about Calzaghe last week or the week before. Busted his hands up being a banger, basically. Had his friend build him a heavy bag that counted the number of punches and just make sure that he's trying to break the record every round that he trains. The more punches you land, the more chance you got of hurting the opponent, and also the more you're winning every time you're landing punches. So no matter what combat sport you're in, not landing punches, or any time spent not landing punches, is time where you're not actively trying to win the fight. As important as defense is generally, overwhelming people is the easiest way to win fights. The fact that Calzaghe was also defensively brilliant and good at getting in and getting out without getting hurt, bonus. And what Bisping does is fairly similar. He doesn't show a lot of variety. Well, he shows variety, but not in his punches. It'll be 1-1-2, 1-2. Lots of stuff like that. Doesn't really use his hooks that much, except the big left hook that knocked out Rockhold. Step up left high kick doesn't really land them that often. What he does is just beats guys down with attrition. So yes, they have that in common. I didn't know that Joe Calzaghe was reviled. I suppose maybe because people were like, oh, he only beat Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins when they were old men. But then simultaneously, Bernard Hopkins was being heralded as the savviest old-timer of all time. That was one loss in the middle of a lot of wins. So, they should have fought sooner, him and Roy Jones, and him and Bernard Hopkins. But it's boxing. These things don't happen. I would say one thing that I really like about Bisping and Calzaghe is their holding and hitting. Calzaghe was very good at sneaking it in. Well, let's talk about Bisping first, because one of my favourite fights of his is that Mayhem fight. Mayhem, such a sloppy striker, and I think he'd been working with Cordero or something like that, so he was getting more confident in going after things. But he keeps stooping down to like counter jab when Bisping comes in, so Bisping just starts putting his hand over the back of his neck, over the nape or whatever it is, and doing what I like to call the lace, which is where both your lead hands are over the other shoulder, and he cups behind Mayhem's head and starts hitting him with uppercuts. That was a favourite of Lennox Lewis, another British boxer, technically Canadian, but I think we claim him, don't we? But that was a really good fight, dirty boxing-wise for Bisping, and then he'd hit him in the body too. Does a lot of stiff arming to the face as well. Back to that Ponzinibbio fight, controversial. But Joe Calzaghe versus Jeff Lacey is a beautiful example of tie-ups and then hitting between the tie-ups. He's taking like Russian 2-on-1s on Jeff Lacey and hitting him with the free hand. I say free hand. Take a 2-on-1 on one side and then you free the furthest hand from the opponent and hit him up the middle so that you're controlling the tricep. Yeah, there you go. If you watch the Jeff Lacey fight, brilliant tie-ups in that. He stops Jeff Lacey working whenever he wants him to, and then he'll start opening up from positions where Jeff Lacey thinks that he's in a proper clinch where he can't work. Cheers, Marlin Hander. Dear Jack, this is a long question here, so I've edited it down just to the questions. 1. I like how a frequent topic of discussion here is underused techniques. GSP had a cool sequence where he had Matt Serra on all fours, controlled his hips and the back of his back of his neck, driving hard knees to his body, maintaining position for the most part. My thought is, why don't more people risk the control for a potentially devastating stand-up soccer kick to the body? A quick shove, stand up and break their ribs with the shin, while they are likely cover their head in panic. I do believe I saw Rich Franklin do this once during his reign, and it looked brutal. It could be especially useful if you are striking-minded anyway, and want to return to your feet regardless. Yeah, loads of guys have used the knee to the body against the Turtle. Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor, all sorts of guys do it. Problem is, it only really works if the guy's tired and staying in the Turtle. The fact that GSP pulled it off against Matt Serra is quite impressive because Matt Serra had Granby back to guard several times in that fight. You were also risking the guy standing up. It's that desire to maintain control, which, if you train a lot of grappling, it just overwhelms you. There's just a discomfort letting the guy get away just to land a good shot on him. This is what made Fedor so interesting. He would happily go to knee on belly from side control just to drop a punch. That's a position that you're probably going to get bumped back to guard. But he went for it anyway. He'd pass guard, he'd posture up and start punching, and then they'd recover guard, but he'd keep punching him. You do lose a lot of control if you do that pop-up knee to the belly, knee to the body. The other problem is that the elbow is often in the way. Guys know that if they're on all fours, they can't be kneed in the head, and you definitely don't want to be kicking someone's elbow. Also, the shape of the body, it just quite nicely protects you a lot of the time. Your knee and elbow, if you tuck your elbow inside your knee or bring your elbow onto your thigh, if you're locking up a tight turtle, can be quite hard to dig in those knees. Especially as the turtle is an active position, the guy should be looking to get back to guard. If you watch Saulo Ribeiro and Zanja Ribeiro, their policy on the turtle basically is that they look to one side where the opponent is, like open up their near leg a bit, and then they'll just kick it out behind them and sit back. And by falling on their side, that knee comes in to recover guard. You got the Granby, you got that, you got all sorts of ways to recover guard if you give them any space. It's the same thing as if you try and soccer kick a guy as he's doing a technical stand-up. He should be dropping to his back. It's quite an easy way to put his feet back between you and him. But yeah, there's potential there. Second question. It is quite refreshing to hear you mention Masaki Noiri at times on the podcast. He doesn't get enough recognition for how crafty he is, in my opinion. I stumbled onto his K1 tournament performances and have watched everything I can find. And have since watched everything I can find. Seems like the best fight the best in kickboxing far more often than in MMA, and definitely more often in boxing than in boxing. I'm sure it is a great many things, but what could account for this? I am clearly biased to kick fighting, so I will say it's because they best want to fight the best, and the best more often in that sport. Whatever. I don't know about that. Like, any good fighter in kickboxing, they fight more often, and they often go to China and have weird fights against nobodies on their record. Rico Verhoeven, I think his last loss was against some fairly unknown heavyweight in China. Even in like Bellator kickboxing, they keep giving Giorgio Petrosian not great opponents. Raymond Daniels, we were looking forward to him like getting back on the horse after some tough losses to top flight competition in Valtellini and Holzken. Had a great second fight against Holzken before losing by cut, I believe, but showed lovely shoulder roll in that fight. Brilliant work on the ropes where he'd had so much trouble before. And then he just disappears to Bellator kickboxing to fight nobodies. But then you got Rico Verhoeven with no one to fight. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Like, guys do fight more often in kickboxing generally, which they can do because they're doing 3-minute rounds or whatever it is. And of course, the wear and tear on grappling training is considerably higher than if you'll get bruised kickboxing, but you're not going to tear up your knees and ankles and fingers and shit. I don't know why the best fight the best more often in kickboxing. I would guess because boxing's model has made it so that you want two guys who are either undefeated or have long streaks and massive amounts of wins, and you want time for people to anticipate the fight. You can have the best fight the best in kickboxing, and guys, that could all happen without you hearing word one of it. In boxing, we've been waiting on Canelo versus Triple G for ages. When that happens, you'll know about it, MMA has generally been very good at making the best fight the best, in the UFC at least. It used to be a meritocracy. Now, it's not so much, but can't complain too much. They do a pretty good job generally. Question 3. Lastly, I know you love tournaments. Have you watched any of the recent rounds of the Enfusion with an E, League Kickboxing? I have not. That sounds fun. Enfusion, send me your events so I can watch them. Right, that'll do it for questions this week. Send your questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And let's have a quick look down the fights going on this weekend. We got Weidman versus Gastelum. Written 2 pieces on that this week. Wrote the Unlikely Rise of Kelvin Gastelum, and then the Tactical Guide to Weidman versus Gastelum, which is going up today. Weidman has fallen on tough times. I think the main thing about Weidman was that he was a really strong wrestler grappler who could box comfortably. So you saw him frustrate Anderson Silva just by not lashing out and running in face first, throwing out the jab. But Silva was doing all this hit me stuff, but he does that when he wants guys to lead, and Weidman was just plodding forward, throwing out non-committal jabs. And then obviously Silva got frustrated in the first fight and got knocked out, but in the second fight got beat up properly before breaking his own shin, which is a sad side effect of the job. That's a win for Weidman. Don't be like freak TKO or freak injury or whatever. Guy kicked his shin, he checked it, he'd done it on the one before too. And the main problem in the first fight was that Weidman was eating kicks to the legs. Machida used pressure beautifully, cut off the cage, put him on the fence, double right hands into takedowns. Love that technique. If you are up against a southpaw and you're a wrestler, that's the one. Or you are a southpaw wrestler, that's the one. Or a southpaw infighter. Julio Cesar Chavez used that fantastically against southpaws. But his trouble came against first Luke Rockhold, but that was a good fight up until that wheel kick, which is a bit of a shame. But Rockhold, obviously the much more comfortable kicker, really showed Weidman's weakness to the open side body kick. Nobody has fought more southpaws than Weidman, though. Between 2011, when he fought Tom Lawler, and 2017, when he fought Musashi, he fought one other orthodox fighter. Everyone else was southpaw. Damien Maia, Anderson Silva twice, Vitor Belfort, Lyoto Machida, Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero. That's a lot of southpaws. Guy, even if he's not great at stopping them, at least he's used to that now. So Kelvin Gastelum doesn't have the advantage of being unusual for this guy. And then beating Vitor Belfort, obviously just come off the TRT, just gassed almost immediately. It was the Sakuraba fight all over again if Sakuraba could get mount and pound the guy out really quickly. But then he fought Yoel Romero, looks awkward, gets a few of his shots in, gets Romero down, doesn't have time to pass the guard like he did against Lyoto Machida. Really good guard passer, Chris Weidman. If you watched him against Musashi, smash passes, or whatever you want to call it, folding pass, straight into mount, BJ Penn style. But Romero didn't play any guard. He immediately went to his hands and feet, got back up. So Weidman's there with the body lock, trying to take his back, but can't comfortably put the hooks in without falling off. Then against Gegard Mousasi, looked great for the first round. Second round, he's eating these jabs, he's throwing long, reaching right hands and getting countered off them, and he's reaching in, obviously, for that single leg. You know, Weidman's single leg is interesting because it's not like a level change or, you know, there's no like smack of the lead shoulder to pick up the leg as Frankie Edgar does. He just sort of leans down and grabs it. It's weird to watch, but he does it to really good guys. I mean, he put Yoel Romero down. It was just that Yoel Romero got back up very quickly. Problem is that if he's not comfortably in boxing range, that doesn't work. So the more tentative he is about striking, the harder it is to get those takedowns. When Weidman's at his best, he's walking into striking range, you know, comfortable that he can slip the punches or counter or whatever, and then he's reaching for the leg. So that was fine against Silva and Machida in that, but really struggled when Musashi put him on the end of his jab after a round of being taken down and passed. Really struggled when he couldn't hold Yoel Romero down. Now, this is what's interesting about Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum, if you watch his tough run, which I did the other day to write that article, he is sloppy as hell. He's just this amateur wrestler who goes to his hands and knees all the time and rolls out of things. And that fight with Bubba McDaniel, they both give up their back about 4 times to the other one before he finally gets the choke. Has that awkward knockout of whoever it was in 30 seconds with his chin up, trading punches. And then, you know, just being afforded the time to train full time, suddenly he's become this amazing boxer puncher with slick movement. You know, always the 1-2, doesn't have a huge deep bag of tricks, but lovely awareness of distance, and, you know, cracking out the 1-2 over and over. Legit. Knocked out Vitor Belfort with a double 1-2. Max Holloway just knocked out Jose Aldo with the double 1-2. If you can keep the distance the same and all they're going to do is move their head, you might as well give them another 1-2. And that's what he does very well. When he hurts someone, he doesn't crowd them. Like, he doesn't crowd his own punches. He'll throw the 1-2, crack him with the 2, and then he'll just keep the distance to throw the 1-2 again. Maybe he'll uppercut them if they step in, but doesn't like step in and start swinging hooks or anything. Doesn't really work the body, which is a bit of a shame, because especially against Weidman, that'd be a useful thing to do. Especially with that left straight. I love a good left straight to the solar plexus. Well, I don't love taking one. I mean, I just love watching them. But one of the interesting things about Gastelum in this matchup is that he still does that thing where he scrambles up to all fours and builds up again. Like against Tim Kennedy, that's all he did. He just survived, got up to all fours, got up to his feet over and over. And then he hit the same arm roll. Well, what isn't really an arm roll? I don't know what it is. I'm not an amateur wrestler, but the one where he takes the leg and the arm. And Neil Magny, he arm rolled him twice. You know, this same arm roll that was reversing position against guys on tough, suddenly working against really good guys. So really interesting fight, looking forward to that. Read the tactical guide if you want my like hypothetical game plans, but I think, well, I'd love to see either work the body, but it won't happen. But what will probably dictate this fight is how much of Weidman's gas tank goes in the first, because he's slowed down so badly in his last 2 fights. Also, if he begins to look panicked. The guy fights amazingly when he's patient and happy getting in range. He fights very badly when he's not happy getting in range and he's reaching for these long takedowns and swinging wild right hands. What else we got on the card? Darren Elkins is back against Dennis Bermudez. Is that his best opponent yet? That's a pretty big name in that division, at least. After that amazing fight, was it Mirsad Bektik or someone else? The guy who was just battering him made an amazing comeback. Jimmy Rivera versus Thomas Almeida. Great fight. Thomas Almeida still only 21-1. Jimmy Rivera 20-1. So really good guys. Like, you know, that could be main event, really. I mean, it's just we have to sell the names we know. Alex Oliveira is on the card against Ryan LaFleur. You'll remember Ryan LaFleur. He headlined a card with Damian Maia at one point. And then Gian Vellante versus Patrick Cummins for the What is the State of This Division title. Not a bad night of fights, actually. I'm looking forward to that. And that's in Long Island, New York. Oh, so partisan crowd towards Weidman there, eh? Right, quick book of the week and then we'll get out of here. Book of the week this week, I dug it out for an article I wrote on drop kicks. Run up, like 2-footed drop kicks. It's a book by Bruce Clayton called Shotokan's Secret. If you know anything about Shotokan karate, great for you. But basically, it's almost like a fan fiction. The guy, if you don't know about Okinawa, in about the 1400s, whoever was put in charge of the kingdom said, okay, no more weapons. So everyone had to get rid of all their weapons. They were a disarmed kingdom. They were like a kingdom of Japan. I think they went back and forth with China over it, the Ryukyus. But basically, only the elites would have been allowed weapons. But like, except for a couple of guys practicing whatever it was at the time, kenjutsu, you didn't have actual weapons. So Clayton's theory was that these guys who became the karate stylists, they called it tei or hand or tode, Chinese hand, because most of it they got from China. But the idea was that if these high-ranking karate, well, they would become karateka, but these highly regarded martial artists also happen to be all the elite families or members of elite families, and a lot of them happen to be in the king's closest circle. So essentially bodyguards. So it gives all the background of Commodore Matthew Perry coming to Japan, or Okinawa rather, with his gunships and rifles, and basically outlining how techniques from classical forms could mean like not just block the punch, counter punch, but applications as bodyguarding technique and all that shit. So the reason it came up in my article was because we were talking about, he talks about a classical form called Shinto, or Gankak if you're Gankaku rather, if you're a Shotokanite. But Shinto is the name of the Chinese sailor that Matsumura, who was the king's head bodyguard, learnt these techniques from. Shinto was a guy who basically washed up on Okinawa, snuck into people's houses to steal food, and then the king's bodyguard was basically sent to sort him out. Apparently, they had like an epic wushu fight, and Shinto said, "Okay, well, if you feed me and don't send me to jail, I'll show you my moves." And then Matsumura compiled those moves into this form. And so Clayton's theory was that it was about higher and lower ground, as you would find on a beach where the fight supposedly happened, or as you would find in a castle on a staircase. So he says the form moves in two directions, and he said that one direction represents fighting upwards, and one direction represents fighting downwards. So you got like X blocks and things for fighting against someone on higher ground, like trying to grab a leg and if you've ever seen like the Seoinage where you have the opponent's leg rather than their arm, really cool. Basically that stuff. And then going downhill or downwards, you got flying kicks and shit. And that's where he says, like, this is bodyguarding. You've got to put your life at risk to save the king, blah, blah, blah. And that's where I linked in the article this amazing clip from a street fight where two guys are fighting by a car next to a hill, and someone just flies in from the top of the picture, drop kicks one of the guys in the head. It's amazing. Anyway, it reads like fan fiction, but it's a really good laugh. And if you have like a classical martial arts background, it's interesting. Shotogan's Secret, Bruce Clayton. Right, I reckon that'll do us this week. We didn't go quite as long as last week, but there wasn't really as much happening. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Don't forget to sign up to the Patreon and buy Notorious. Have a kick-ass week, and I'll see you next week. Cheers!